Very good. So welcome to our session today. Our presenter is Al Smith, and today's session is all about streamlining application lifecycle management in the Power Platform. Definitely we'll have some government cloud context today because we've got some new features and capabilities available. So we'll be calling those out for our government customers. And we aim to provide a digital event today that respects all individuals. We ask that everyone assists in providing a welcoming and safe environment. We do bring 3 of these sessions to our customers each month, generally the last 3 Thursdays of the month. And if you have a topic you would like us to consider in our schedule, go ahead and drop that in the chat and we will take that into consideration. And during today's session, we do have attendees muted to avoid any background noises, but we will be taking questions in the chat. So go ahead and drop them there. And we have solution engineers at the ready to answer those during the presentation. If we have time at the end, we will unmute the lines and take them there as well, live. And again, after today's session, you will receive a follow-up email with the recording, so you can look for that. And with that, then we are ready to get started, Al. So I'm going to hand it over to you. And thank you so much for bringing this topic to our customers today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Deb. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm Al Smith. I'm the Chief AI Business Solutions Architect. And today I'll define application lifecycle management, take a look at some fundamentals of ALM, and I'll demonstrate the various tools that are available to support your Microsoft Power Platform ALM journey. Let's talk about why application lifecycle management, or ALM, really matters in the Power Platform. At its core, ALM ensures that our apps and flows are reliable, secure, and repeatable. Without it, organizations often fall into the trap of manual errors, inconsistent deployments, and gaps in compliance. And that's especially risky in government environments where accountability is a non-negotiable. On this slide, you'll see 4 key reasons why ALM is so important. First, governance. ALM provides structure and oversight, making sure changes are tracked, approved, and deployed in a very controlled way. Next, consistency. Instead of each developer or team member doing things differently, ALM ensures a standard process for building and releasing solutions. Third, we have collaboration. And with ALM in place, business users, developers, and IT can work together more effectively because everyone is working from the same playbook, essentially. And finally, for government especially, ALM aligns with requirements like auditability and change management and regulatory compliance. So that means that we can not only deliver solutions faster, but also ensure that they meet the strict standards agencies must adhere to. So in short, ALM is not just about moving solutions from one environment to another. It's about creating a foundation of trust, repeatability, and compliance that organizations can rely on. Now let's take a look at the fundamentals of ALM in the Power Platform. There are 4 main stages in the lifecycle: source, build, deploy, and monitor. Each of these stages plays a critical role in making sure our solutions are that reliable, repeatable, and compliant that we're looking for. So we start with source control, which is really the foundation. This is where we manage changes to our solutions, apps, and flows. And in the Power Platform, that often means exporting a solution, unpacking it, storing those components in a repository like GitHub, with the benefit here being accountability. Every change is tracked with version history, so we always know who made a change, what they changed, when it happened, and why that change was needed. For government agencies, that kind of traceability is essential for auditability and compliance. The next stage is build automation. Once we've captured changes in source control, we want to package and validate them before deployment. Think of this as a quality gate, automated checks like Solution Checker, which can be run to make sure that the solution meets best practices, and even automated tests can be run and added to confirm everything is working as expected. This stage helps us catch problems early and prevents errors from making their way downstream into production environments. From there, we move into deployment. This is where ALM really shines because it takes what is often a manual, error-prone process of exporting and importing solutions and replaces it with pipelines or GitHub workflows. These tools allow us to move solutions from dev to test and then into production in a consistent and repeatable way. Deployments can also include approval steps, ensuring compliance with change management policies. The big advantage here is consistency. Whether we deploy today or 6 months from now, the process is the same and far less dependent on human intervention. And finally, once a solution is live, we reach the stage of monitoring. This is about visibility. Monitoring gives us insight into app usage, flow success and failure rates, capacity limits, and even adoption metrics. It lets us catch issues early, such as a flow that starts failing after a connector change. And it also gives us the information we need to improve solutions over time. In public sector, monitoring is directly tied to governance, ensuring that solutions remain secure, efficient, and compliant throughout their entire lifespan. Together, these 4 stages of source, build, deploy, and monitor form a complete life cycle. Instead of treating the app development as a one-time event, ALM turns it into a continuous, well-governed cycle. That's what keeps Power Platform solutions healthy, scalable, and trustworthy in the long term. Now, when we talk about solutions in the Power Platform, we're really talking about a container that holds all of the pieces of an application or an automation. And solutions aren't just about apps. They package every component that makes those apps and flows work so that we can move them between environments in a consistent way. This slide shows just how much can live inside of a solution. The category that I've labeled main includes a wide variety of foundational components, things like Dataverse tables, option sets, dashboards, connection roles, and templates for articles, emails, or even mail merge. It also includes service endpoints and field security profiles, which control how data is integrated and protected. Our visual components include the apps themselves, like Canvas apps and model-driven apps, as well as PCF controls and web resources that extend our user interface. Next, under processes and plugins, we have flows, plugin assemblies, and SDK message processing steps. These handle the automation and business logic that power our apps. Then there are reports and security roles, which are critical for governing who has access to what and ensuring that solutions meet compliance and organizational requirements. The key takeaway here is that solutions are holistic. They don't just move an app, they move everything an app depends on. And that's why solutions are so important in ALM. They ensure what you build in dev works exactly the same way when you move it to test or a production environment. When it comes to implementing ALM for Power Platform solutions, there are really three different approaches as of now, and each one fits a different maturity level. The first approach I mentioned earlier is manual export and import. This is where most teams begin. You build a solution in one environment, export it as a file, and then manually import it into another environment. It's simple, requires no setup, and it works fine for very small teams or one-off deployments, but it doesn't really scale. It's error prone, particularly when we hit those nasty dependencies, and there's no version control. So it can quickly become a bottleneck. The next approach is Power Platform pipelines. This is the natural next step for organizations, and it's a big improvement. Pipelines are built directly into the platform, which means they're low-code friendly, easy to configure, and now fully supported in GCC. They allow makers and departmental teams to move solutions from dev to test and production in a consistent, repeatable way without a lot of overhead. And finally, we have GitHub integration. This is the most advanced approach designed for enterprise IT and highly regulated workloads. With GitHub, you get full CI/CD automation, branching strategies, approvals, and enterprise-grade governance. It's more complex to set up and requires a higher level of maturity, but it provides the richest set of capabilities for organizations that need that level of control. The key takeaway here is that ALM is not a one-size-fits-all. You can start simple with import-export or pipelines, which are accessible and powerful, and then grow into GitHub integration as your organization's needs and maturity evolve. Let's look at each of these more closely, starting with the manual exporting and importing of Power Platform solutions from one environment to another. When I start in my solution or in my Solution Explorer, I simply select the solution and I can choose to publish it on the export, or I can export this as either a managed or an unmanaged solution. When we're moving from an elevated, to an elevated environment, I want to export it as managed. And so that export now takes place, and I can download the zip file that was produced as part of the packaging. Next, I move to the target environment. This could be either a staging, a test, or a production environment. And here I can simply import the solution, select the zip file that was just exported, and when all of the solution checks are done, I can choose to import that solution. When the import is completed, I publish my changes. And then if I look under the managed managed solutions, there is my solution. And if I open it up, you can see the components that I have in it. It's just a single table that I've added. The next approach to ALM is Power Platform pipelines. Pipelines are built directly into the platform, provide an easy, intuitive way to move solutions across environments in a consistent and governed manner. The process begins with installing pipelines in our environment. This is done in the Power Platform Admin Center under Dynamics 365 applications. And once installed, pipelines becomes available as a feature inside of your tenant. Next, we define the environments. This step is where we give the pipeline a name and point it to the right environments using environment IDs from the admin center. This tells the pipeline exactly where solutions will be moving. So for example, from development to test or from test to production. Once the environments are defined we add what are called pipeline stages. This is where we map out the flow, which environment is the target, and what pre-export or pre-deployment steps we want to add to include. For example, we might add a step to validate the solution or require an approval before moving forward. And finally, we're ready to deploy the solution. At this stage, makers can run the pipeline directly from within the solution. Deployments can be run in real time or scheduled, and the process ensures that what's moved into test or production is consistent with what was developed. So at a high level, pipelines give us a structured, repeatable way to deploy solutions without requiring deep GitHub expertise. In just a moment, I'll show you how this looks in action by walking through a live pipeline deployment. The big advantage of pipelines is that they're maker-friendly. So they don't require knowledge of source control, command line tools, or YAML files. Instead, they give citizen developers and departmental teams a low-code way to deploy their work consistently. Pipelines also support environment variables and connection references, which means you can swap out things like SharePoint sites, email connectors, or endpoint URLs automatically as you move across environments. Another major plus is that pipelines are available in GCC, so government agencies can use them in compliance with whatever your cloud requirements may be. As with each of these approaches, there are trade-offs. Pipelines are designed for simplicity, so they don't offer the same level of customization or governance as a full GitHub pipeline. For example, you won't have branching strategies or complex approval gates built in the way that you would with GitHub Actions. So while pipelines are excellent for departmental use or organizations just getting started with ALM, they're not always the final destination for teams that need enterprise-grade CI/CD. Let's begin with installing pipelines in our source environment and configuring a pipeline for deployment. I begin within the Power Platform Admin Center, and I select the environment that I want to install pipelines in. I'm going to do it inside of my GCC dev environment, and first I'm going to enable this as a managed environment. It's not necessary for installing pipelines. However, it will be necessary for executing them. You'll notice I don't have pipelines readily available or enabled in my environment, so I'm going to install the Pipelines app first. I agree to the terms, and I install the app. This does take a little bit of time. So what I did is a little bit of made for TV. Now my Power Platform Pipelines is installed. And we are ready to proceed. Next, we'll leverage the model-driven deployment pipeline configuration app, and we'll start with the pipelines dashboard. Mine is empty right now since we've just installed the app, but this gives admins and makers a single place to manage their pipelines. From this dashboard, you can see that the pipelines have been created, the environments that they're connected to, and the stages configured for each pipeline. So you can see here, I'm configuring my environment for a new pipeline. And I'm beginning with identifying what my environments are. I leverage the environment ID, which can be found inside of the Power Platform Admin Center. And I'm creating my dev environment or my source environment and my target environment. If I return to my dashboard, I can, actually, it doesn't show my environments, but let's go ahead and create a new pipeline instead. Because now I'm going to reference those environments that I just created. So I'm going to call this this pipeline deploy from dev to test. And I'm going to deploy the AI deployment notes. This is a notes release generator. And although it is visible here in GCC, it does not work yet in GCC. So I will just add my own notes when I am creating my deployment. Now I'm linking my environments to this pipeline, and I'm going to start defining what my deployment stages are. So I'm going to have actually just one, and I am going to call it dev to test. I'm going to identify my target deployment environment. And here is where I mentioned earlier about the pre-export steps and pre-deployment steps that could be added in. If I check those boxes, then I'll have the opportunity to define those steps as well. But to keep this as straightforward as possible for demo, I am going to not do any of the pre or validation steps. And instead, we're going to move right on to now adding our solution to a pipeline. So I'm going to come back into my Power Apps. I'm going to select my solution. And on the left-hand side, you see I have the pipeline selection. I have just the one pipeline right now, so it's the default. And you see it has that stage that we just created. So a dev do a test. It has just one stage. And this is where you can define for it to either run now, or you can schedule it to run at a later time. I'm going to go ahead and run it now just so that we can see it run. It's got version 1001 of my solution. These are the deployment notes that if I had left that AI deployment notes turned on, it would have created a set of notes for me. But again, there's just an issue with it in GCC right now in just that portion, just the deployment notes. So I put mine in manually and I click deploy. You see, I have my history of deployments. And back on my dashboard, we can find the analytics around and the history of the deployments that have been done across all of my pipelines. And if we wanted to, we could even see, we can drill down and see what the assets were or the artifacts that had been moved. You see that the unmanaged file had been extracted, created and managed, and both copies were saved. Now, if I come back into my environment, my test environment, I look at my managed solutions, and there is the table contained within my managed solution. And although we're not talking much about Azure DevOps today, GitHub Actions work pretty much the same way. I'm focusing on GitHub integration since it's most recently been made available in GCC. We've waited for this for a very long time, and it is now available in GCC. And with GitHub, we're able to take ALM in the Power Platform to an enterprise level. Instead of manually exporting and importing solutions or even using pipelines, as we just saw, GitHub allows us to automate common build and deployment tasks. That includes provisioning or deprovisioning environments, unpacking and unpacking solutions, and pushing changes directly to and from a source repository. What this means in practice is that every update to a solution can be version controlled in GitHub. Changes are unpacked into human readable files, committed to a branch, reviewed, and then merged through pull requests. From there, GitHub Actions automatically run workflows, importing the updated solution into test, running solution checker or quality gates, and then promoting it into production when approved. This approach brings us a full CI/CD capability inside of the Power Platform, with all the benefits of governance, approvals, and traceability that development teams already rely on. And because GitHub integration is now available in GCC, government agencies can use these same enterprise-grade practices within their secure cloud. Now, let me pause a moment because I've used that term CI/CD a few times now. And so for everyone's information, CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous deployment. Continuous integration is the practice of frequently merging changes like updates to your apps, flows, or tables into a shared source repository. Automated checks such as solution checker or unit tests run to validate the changes early, which reduces the overall risk of errors. And continuous deployment is the practice of automatically packaging and promoting solutions into those target environments. So whether that be test, UAT, staging, or production, after it passes that validation. And so together, CI/CD is about automating the build, validation, and deployment of solutions so that every change is tested, tracked, and rolled out in a reliable and governed way. So as I mentioned, to take ALM in the Power Platform to that enterprise level, we can now integrate with GitHub. Let's walk through the main steps to set this up. We start by connecting to GitHub. This involves authenticating Power Platform with GitHub, usually through a service principal or a personal access token. And this connection gives us the ability to push and pull solution files between environments and the repository. Next, we export and unpack solutions using the Power Platform CLI, or what we're going to see today is GitHub Actions. So we're going to use the visual aspect of GitHub to export a solution from the source environment and unpack it into individual human readable components like YAML and JSON files, which makes it much easier to version control every element of the solution. From there, we commit and branch. So we'll push the unpacked files into our GitHub repository, and developers or makers can work in feature branches. Changes are committed and reviewed through pull requests before being merged into the main branch. And this step is critical because it brings discipline and traceability into the ALM process. Once version control is in place, we configure our GitHub Actions. Workflows can be set up to automate tasks like running the solution checker, packing the solution, provisioning or deprovisioning environments, and importing the solution into test or production. And finally, we deploy via workflow. So when changes are merged into the main branch, GitHub Actions trigger the deployment pipeline. This ensures that deployments are automated, governed, and consistent with approvals and quality checks built right into the process. At a high level, GitHub integration gives us all the benefits of enterprise CI/CD, automation, branching, approvals, and auditability. So let's walk through this process and deploy our solution once more. We begin in our Microsoft Azure, and at the tenant level, we want to create a new app registration. This will register our active environment, essentially with a set of credentials that GitHub will be able to use to access our individual environments. Once I have the app set up, I am going to apply some API permissions, essentially teaching it what I want it to use to connect to. There is a native Dynamics CRM or Dynamics 365 API, and I'm going to allow for user impersonation. Finally, I need to grant admin consent for my organization to that API. And now I can generate a client secret. So I'm going to give it a name. We'll call it Power Platform ALM Secret. And what I'm going to want to do is capture each of these values. So my secret ID, its value. I'm going to then flip back over to my tenant because I also want to grab, or I'm sorry, to my application because I want to grab the application ID and the tenant ID. Excuse me. And all I'm doing is storing these off screen here on a notepad because these values are going to become important to us in just a little bit. Next, I'm going to move over to my Power Platform Admin Center. And I'm going to come into one of my environments. And what I need to do is for each environment that we're going to use as part of our ALM, I have to now add that application as a user. And the reason that I captured the app ID is because it's much easier to pull it from Entra by that ID than try to search through all of the users that may be part of your domain. Before I add security roles, I want to add the business unit for my organization. So I will copy and paste that. Create my user. And then I'm going to assign the sysadmin role to that user. I just want to reiterate that everything we're doing today is in my GCC tenant. So if you also live in the government community cloud, everything that you're seeing me do here today, you have the ability to also do. Next, I'm going to go into my target environment, and I am going to do the same thing. I'm going to add that application user to my test environment. And this time I'm just going to do it a little differently. I'm going to add the security role right here. It doesn't matter which order you do it in. Next, I log into GitHub, and I've already created a repo called ALM Solutions inside of my GitHub. And I'm going to go into Settings, and I want to add the secret that we created. So I'm going to create a new repository secret. I'm going to use the same name. Actually, no, I'm not, because I want no spaces. So I'm just going to call it a Power Platform SPN, but I am going to use the value of the secret that we copied over a little bit earlier. Next, I'm going to start creating actions. So the first thing that I'm going to do is create a reusable YAML. This is, oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. I'm going to first do my export and branch so that we can bring our solution into GitHub. So in my YAML, I'm just going to update a couple of parameters. And all of these files that I'm copying, pasting in, and using will be available at the end. One of the links is integrating GitHub with Power Platform. And all of these YAMLs, the YAML scripts or YAML files, are available as part of that learning path. It's the kind of thing where you're going to download once and just keep changing. You see, I have old information in here from previous deployments. I'm just going to overwrite those with my newest. And when I have all of the variables updated, I can commit the changes to that document. When I run the workflow, what this is going to do, it's going to open up my dev environment, and it's going to do a pull or a push, depending on your point of view, from my dev environment into GitHub of just that solution. If I expand the workflow, you can see that I have just the one stage, and we can actually watch it go step by step. If there happen to be any failed steps, it will show us what failed and why. We simply correct our YAML, and then we can rerun the workflow. And we have a successful run of our export from dev. The last thing that I want to do is that pull request, because this is now in the store of my repo. But what I want to do is pull a copy of it. And I do that by creating a branch. And do my pull request. Finally, I merge my request so that my copy of the repo is synced with the original. And if we happen to drill down, I mentioned that all of the files are saved. So here's the XML for my entity. Everything is broken down and packaged as though it were part of the solution. So now that it's in our repo, What we want to do is start building out a deployment of our solution. Did I just do that again? Hold on. Hang on just a second. Looks like I brought the wrong video into my deck, so that was correct. Okay, sorry. Here's where we want to begin. I'm back in my repo and I go into my ALM solutions. And now I want to start building the workflow that will do the deployment itself. So again, I create a new workflow. I give it a name. And this is one of those files that I was talking about that will not change per deployment. It's a parameterized, think of it as an include file. And so all I want to change is what my default is from an environment perspective, the build environment, the production environment, and then my client and tenant IDs. So those same values that we've already copied out. And then what I will be able to do is include this YAML in every other workflow that I call that I want to use to deploy a solution from my dev to my test. So now I'm going to go ahead and build the actual workflow that will do the deployment. Again, a reusable file that'll be available in the learning path that's at the end. I'm going to call this deploy to prod. I'm going to update the solution name. Now, the one difference here is that I've created a third environment to use as an intermediate, and I've called it my build environment. And the reason I did that is so that I still have an unmanaged validation area for my solution. So what my workflow is going to do is actually take a copy of the unmanaged, put it into my build environment first. Then, upon success of that, it is going to take a copy from my development, my GitHub, and put it into production as a managed solution. This goes back to the auditing that I was talking about. It is not required. It is just a good practice. That way, if something happens in production, I can look back at my build and see what it looked like there. Now I'm able to run my workflow that will deploy the solution from dev to build, and then from dev to my test or my staging. Again, we can watch this. This is going to take a bit longer. So after we just see a couple of these actions, I'll do a little bit more made for TV here. And I will verify then. Let's see, we did all of that. That in my GCC dev, I have a GitHub ALM table in my solution. Now I come into my build. That same solution is there and unmanaged. And finally, we go to our target, which is my test, could be a staging. And we have a managed copy of the exact same solution with the exact same table. So today I've covered and demoed various ways to implement and streamline ALM for your Power Platform solutions. We started with the fundamentals of application lifecycle management, including governance, consistency, collaboration, and compliance. Then we talked about solutions in the Power Platform, and then looked at 3 different approaches that organizations can use depending on their maturity and needs. First approach was the manual export and import, where teams often begin because it's simple, requires no setup. It works well for the small teams or one-off deployments, but as I mentioned, it quickly becomes cumbersome. Sometimes manual processes can be error-prone, lack that version control, and don't scale well in larger environments. The next approach is Power Platform pipelines, which are built right into the platform and provide an easy, intuitive way for makers to deploy their solutions across environments. They bring consistency, support environment variables, and available in GCC, which is a huge win for our government customers. Pipelines are best suited for departmental teams or organizations that want a low-code, straightforward way to introduce ALM practices without heavy DevOps investments. And then finally, there's the GitHub integration, which takes ALM to that enterprise level by unpacking solutions into source control, using branches and pull requests, and automating deployments with GitHub Actions. You can get the full benefit of the CI/CD. This includes the governance, traceability, improvement, and automation that government agencies often need, and the making a GitHub integration the best fit for large IT teams and particularly regulated workloads where compliance and repeatability are critical. First takeaway from all of this, the primary takeaway from all this, is that ALM is not one size fits all. You can start small with manual export and import, step up to pipelines for consistency and simplicity, and then grow into GitHub integration when you need enterprise-grade governance. But no matter where you begin, adopting ALM ensures that your solutions are reliable, secure, and sustainable across their entire life cycle. I want to thank everyone again for tuning in today. And with that, Deb, I will turn it back over to you.